Every year, harmful use of alcohol is responsible for 3 million deaths and 5% of the global health burden, from road traffic injuries to violence, abuse and neglect, to diseases like liver cirrhosis, heart disease, cancers and tuberculosis, to mental health issues like alcohol dependence, depression and suicides. But what can we do about it? Well, the WHO's global strategy, endorsed by member states, aims to reduce the harmful use of alcohol. Unfortunately, implementation of the strategy is uneven. Meet Nina. In her country, there are very few government regulations on drinking. Nina is out with a friend. The alcohol is cheaper than bottled water, and the bar stays open till 4 a.m, so people are encouraged to stay out late and drink more. Nina's friend falls and hurts herself. Now meet Amya. Her government has introduced pricing measures on alcohol, and there's a mandatory closing time for bars, which means Amya and her friend leave for home at midnight. Amya decides to take a taxi, because the police in her country are very active in enforcing drink driving countermeasures. But in Nina's country, the police don't enforce drink driving laws at all, so she decides to drive her friend home. She is way over the limit and crashes her car. Nina and her friend are taken to hospital, using up the time and resources of busy nurses and doctors. Nina's injuries aren't serious, and once they're patched up, she is released immediately. But when she gets home, she is told that her friend died in the car crash. In Amya's country, if people display signs of problems with drinking alcohol, they are offered help early. Amya's country also has restrictions on alcohol advertising, unlike Nina's, where young people can be persuaded to drink to excess by cleverly targeted commercials. If governments implement the WHO's Safer initiative, they can change people's relationship with alcohol, making our world less like Nina's and more like Amya's. Be safer. Strengthening restrictions on alcohol availability. Advancing and enforcing drink driving countermeasures. Facilitating access to screening, brief interventions and treatment. Enforcing restrictions on alcohol advertising. Raising prices on alcohol through taxes and pricing policies. Safer is a WHO-led initiative that follows the global strategy to make our world safer from alcohol-related harm.
Well, Sitaram, and a pleasant good morning to all of our viewers and listeners, and welcome to another edition of the program Addiction and Recovery. I am your moderator this morning, Jason Kalu. Join me as we welcome the host to the program Addiction and Recovery, Mr. Ramnaresh Dwarka. Sitaram to you, sir.
Sure, I'm Jason, and let me join with you in welcoming all our listeners, both in Trinidad and Tobago and worldwide. Those on Facebook and the other social media platforms as well. It's a very beautiful morning here in Trinidad this morning, and I want to thank the team, yourself included, for sourcing that video. Very informative. And if I should just add a local flavor to it, Professor Berbrand had done a study in Trinidad at Port of Spain General Hospital. And what they found that every time the price of alcohol went up in Trinidad, very often in the budget, they will increase the taxes and so the price of alcohol will go up. And there was a definite correlation between the increase in prices of alcohol and the reduction of motor vehicle accidents. That I think is very interesting, and I think it is also borne out no matter where in the world you drink. Once alcohol is unregulated, the incidence of accidents and illness and injury and all of that, crime connected to drug addiction will also spike. And I think the World Health Authority recognizes that. And we in Trinidad and Tobago also recognize that. While I say that, though, that this is a problem that we can't legislate away, and we have had extreme cases. In the 1930s, in the United States, they completely banned alcohol. And even then, a bigger problem started because they had these, basement bars, they call speakeasies. And then the mafia, Al Capone, and all these people got into the business of moonshine and bootlegging and so on. So all of that tells us that once a person starts becoming addicted to the drug, they are going to find very innovative ways to get the drug. And once there's a demand for anything, not only drugs, alcohol and drugs, anything, once there's a demand, there are people who are going to jump in and supply it because it's a commercial enterprise. You know, and economic students of economics will be able to, of course, relate to this, that, you know, the demand is inversely proportional to the supply. And of course, price has a large part to play in that. This morning, Jason, I thought we could speak a little bit about the misconceptions concerning alcoholism and drug addiction, because there are a lot of misconceptions. And, you know, it is said that it ain't what we don't know that gets us in trouble. It's the things that we know that just ain't so. You know, it is, I mean, safer to know, well, look, I don't know something, and so you'd make inquiries and get the information. But so many people have come to firm conclusions about alcoholism and drug addiction, and that in itself has become a barrier. Last week we were speaking about barriers to treatment. Well, misconceptions is one of those big barriers because a lot of people refuse to address the problem or address it appropriately. So that one of the first misconceptions I would like to deal with is the whole fact about, you know, not only in Trinidad, but wherever I have done studies in Jamaica and the Caribbean, I have also looked at studies worldwide. And there seems to be a predominance, an opinion that, you know, you have to be a skid row drunk or a bum. You would have had to lose everything before you can stop drinking, or that before you could be diagnosed as alcoholic. You know, and we in Trinidad as well have that impression. You know, and that has a lot of implications for people who will for the development of insight, because most people think when you ask them to profile a drunk, you know, the first thing comes to mind is a guy who is unkempt, he stopped shaving, he has lost his job, his family has left him, his wife and children have deserted, he is now hanging around the bar and just waiting for a drink. He has to have a drink all the time. And that's the kind of picture comes up is the popular impression we have. You know, somebody sleeping on the pavement, on cardboard, or homeless. And yes, those are people who are alcoholics and drug addicts. But they are alcoholics and drug addicts who have reached the last stage, the chronic stage of alcoholism and drug addiction. Alcoholism and drug addiction as a disease is a progressive illness where, in fact, science has now established that you can be an alcoholic even without taking a drink. Taking a drink and drinking just confirms it, because now they have discovered that there's a genetic predisposition to alcoholism. So the same way we inherit our complexion, our ethnicity, our height, our, you know, mannerisms and all of that from our ancestors, so too we can inherit their predisposition to alcoholism and drug addiction. And I can say that safely because I know my grandfather was an alcoholic. And so that people who have that genetic predisposition have a tendency, from my experience working in the field, when they're not drinking, they're not drinking. But the minute they take one drink, it's as though it wakes up some little genie inside of them that keep asking for more. So that, again, that leads to another misconception that an alcoholic is a person who has to be drinking every day or several times during the day. No, An alcoholic, there are different kinds of alcoholics and drug addicts. In that there are some people who may not drink for days on ends or weeks or even months. But when they take that first drink, they themselves can't predict what will happen. They may take one or two and stop, but generally, once they take that first drink, it starts a craving for more. And that is evidence of a chemical dependency, that people have that chemical dependence in them. So that has led to a lot of misconception as well, where people who are drinking, they think, well, look, I have control. It gives you a false sense that you have control because I don't drink every day. Yes, when I go and take a few drinks, sometimes I go overboard. And then in Trinidad, there's a whole lot of reasons people will give for going overboard. They will say, well, look, I really didn't have anything to eat before I started to drink, and that's why I got drunk. Or somebody probably spilled some cigarette ashes in my drink, and that is what got me drunk. Or they didn't, sanitize the glass, like we say in Trinidad, a juta glass. They gave me somebody's glass that they used, and I think that is what got me drunk. Or there's a multitude of reasons people give, and to start with, they will up to even lying down on the ground, they'll still insist that I'm not drunk. And you would have seen that, Jason, several times. Guy is hopelessly drunk, but he's insisting, listen, give me the key, I could drive, I'm not so drunk. So that misconception in itself as to who is an alcoholic has baffled so many people into progressive drinking, chronic alcoholism, and even up to the last stage of their drinking, they're still holding out that no, I have control because I could stop when I want. And not only the alcoholic has that misconception, the people around them, the family members, the siblings, even the parents sometimes, they can't understand why is it a sensible, intelligent man who went to university even, who is so skilled and competent in so many fields, has the respect of his co-workers and all of that, can't seem to understand that he's destroying himself with alcohol. They just think some people think it's a moral issue. The people in the churches and the mosques and the temple think it is a moral issue. It's a religious thing. Some people will even think that you are possessed or you are hexed. Somebody put some bad spirit on you or something, that you continue, and they're not taking responsibility for the person's drinking. Neither the person is taking responsibility. And I have heard all kinds of reasons, Jason. You wouldn't believe. Working in the field, I've heard mothers who say, when he was small, he climbed this tree and he fell and he hit his head. And I think that is why he is using drugs now. And of course, later on, if drug use causes separation or divorce and estrangement and so on from a marital relationship, the family members will blame the wife instead, because she used to give him so much worries, stress him out. That is why he's drinking so much. And just like the alcoholic and the drug addict can invent rationalizations, that is, excuses for their drinking and their continued drinking, so to the family members as well. They invent excuses for their loved one. And many a day they will call the job and say, he went and eat some Chinese food and he got sick, he can't come out to work. Basically, but he's really hungover from the drinking from the day before. So it is not a question of the person being lazy or weak-willed or just wicked or immoral or anything like that. It is not to say the alcoholic or drug addict does not have some responsibility for his alcoholism or his disease. Because as I say that, the World Health Authority, the Pan American Health Organization, even our Ministry of Health, we have accepted that alcoholism and drug addiction is a disease. It's in the diagnostic statistical manual that psychiatrists and psychologists use now to make the diagnosis. It is recognized as a disease. However, because it's a disease, a lot of time the person suffering with the disease need additional care, professional help in order to be able to stop. And it is a lot of times, and I can tell you from personal experience, a lot of time the alcoholic or the drug addict is aware that they have a problem, that they need to stop. But again, remember I have said in previous programs, we have always been socialized to be self-sufficient, independent. So many of us, including myself, would have tried so many times privately to stop, to control, to manage my drinking. And after you fail so many times, what happens? You stop trying to stop. You start rationalizing and making excuses so that you could continue. So that is one of the misconceptions, is that we always think that the person can stop, but they just don't want to. They're lazy, or they wicked, they immoral, they harden, as we say in Trinidad, or they're rebellious. And then a lot of people think that, look, all you have to do is just stop, And some of them would actually cite instances. They say, look, I know my uncle or my somebody who was able to stop just like that. They didn't have to go to hospital or go to AA or go anywhere. They just stop. And the few people who have been able to do that, like we say, they knock their chest and brag about it. And there are some of these people who were heavy drinkers and probably not alcoholics, and they could stop without any serious problem. But I'm saying this so that our listeners this morning, their siblings, the mothers, their family members, members of the society understand that a person who has been drinking and drinking heavily for a long period of time, when they stop drinking, they tend to go into what is called withdrawal. Some of them, you'll see their hands shaking, they can't sign their name the next day. Some of them, they're, they they suffer with insomnia, they can't sleep if they didn't drink. They suffer with depression, they suffer with anxiety, they have feelings of remorse, the loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting. All of those things are classic symptoms of withdrawal, to the extent where some people start feeling like things crawling on them. It's called tactile hallucination. And some of them actually hallucinate and see horrid uh, experiences of people or animals coming to tear them apart and all of that. So that once you have had those experiences, you don't even wait to have it. You know that if you don't get that drink, what is going to happen in a little while? You're going to start vibrating, and then you'll start seeing and hearing things. And this is what creates the desperation. And I've known people who will drink whatever contains alcohol, even perfume. They drink the perfume and anything. You understand? So that this is why it is not easy. Even though the person has insight, they realize they need to stop. They need to get professional help, especially if they are over 40 and they have had instances of what you call delirium tremens, hallucinations in the past. They must be detoxed under supervision, medical supervision. And they'll say doing it cold turkey never kill nobody, but actually it can kill you, because a person who is hallucinating, their heart starts racing and they can suffer a massive heart attack. It has happened. So literally this thing can kill you. And then in my experience working with alcoholics and drug addicts, yes, and I have found that people who drink alcoholics, they seem to think that they are different from other addicts, we in Trinidad, we have a tendency to call people who smoke cocaine and smoke marijuana and use the other hard drugs, we call them pipers. And yes, because of the nature of that addiction, sometimes they can use up so much money in so short a time that they very often have to resort to stealing to support their habit. At first, they would have exhausted all their own personal resources and all they could get to borrow from their friends and siblings and so on. And then when they can't get any more money to support the habit, the men go out and steal, and the women prostitute themselves. And this is why there's a certain stigma associated with people who are on the harder drugs. And alcoholics seem to think that, look, I am not as bad as them. But the process of addiction is the same. And many of the people who eventually went on to marijuana and cocaine, a lot of them would have started with alcohol or use alcohol at some stage of their addiction. In fact, I have known a lot of cocaine addicts who use it in conjunction. They drink alcohol because alcohol is a sedative, and they use cocaine because it's a stimulant. So they have a tendency to kind of turn their brain into a chemistry lab, where you're taking one thing to bring down the heights, as they call it, and another one to kind of even it off. It's like you're stretching your brain in from two directions, so that it is not, the process of addiction is the same. Even you start developing. First, you might use it for psychological reasons to help you to cope with a situation. Like a guy, when he feels distressed or disappointed, he may take a drink or take a smoke. Or if he feels anxious or stressed out, he may take it for that. And I'm saying he, but it can happen with women as well. The male, female has, except that the male can tend to handle a little more alcohol, is more resilient to the alcohol than female. Females tend to get drunk quicker. Although I know some women will argue with me about that, because some of them have become so tolerant of alcohol that they could drink a lot of men under the table, as we say. But coming back to it, the process of addiction is the same. And as I speak about that, there's a tendency for people, for the uh, now the basis of all of this is that the person, the alcoholic or the drug addict, wants to feel good, and he wants to feel good right away. So that alcohol, if he took alcohol in about 15 to 20 minutes, half an hour, then he will start metabolizing it and feeling the real effect of it. Marijuana might deliver the effect in less time, maybe in 5 to 10 minutes. Cocaine, as you exhale, immediately as you inhale it, you start getting the effect. So this is why the drugs, the harder drugs, the cocaine and the heroin and all of those designer drugs and so on, has greater appeal. Once you start using those, it's just like a guy who used to be walking to get to a destination. Walking is like drinking alcohol. He'll take a little while, and he found marijuana. It's like he got a bicycle. Now he can get there, but he'll get there a little faster. And the guy using cocaine, it's like he's gotten a fast car. After you have a fast car, you don't want to walk anymore. And that is why the preference, the drug of choice, becomes the harder and harder drugs. So the designer drugs is like those people who got their own private jet. They can just take off any minute, and get to where they want to go. So that the addictive propensity of a drug is really inversely proportional to its ability to deliver the feeling, as it were. So that I'm saying all of that to say that alcohol is not different. It's just one step in that ladder to addiction. It's all a process. So there's also the misconception that alcohol is not as addictive because and why it is different, because you can go and buy it. It is legally available. There's no real stigma associated with alcohol use. You go to some of the biggest parties that is hosted by some of our leaders, the politicians and the community leaders, corporate leaders, and so on. And you can't, and one of the high points of those parties is that they have the most expensive alcoholic drinks there, the whiskey and the brandy and all of those things. So that there's a certain perception that, alcohol is available, it is authorized, so that it is not a bad thing. And yes, we, even us in this station here, we have often said it, I am not against people who can take a drink and enjoy. It's not about drying up the world, but this program is about educating our brothers and sisters out there that they will be able to make the right choices. They will be able to recognize that if I have a family history of alcoholism, that I might be predisposed to alcoholism, so I should stay away from it. Or if I started using it and it is starting to cause problems in my life, whether it be health, financial, family, social, criminal, whatever problems, any problem, then I need to stop. Because, if I drink orange juice and all of those things, it don't really cause these problems. Why is it I'm continuing to drink alcohol if I know, or use drugs when I know I can get into trouble with it? So that alcohol is, yes, it is not as potent as some of the other drugs, but it is on that continuum to addiction. So in that respect, it is not really different. Now, in the same vein, a lot of people seem to think that, well, you can't get addicted to prescription drugs. Well, that's not true. In fact, prescription pills, the sleeping pills and the anti-anxiolytics and the antidepressants and the tranquilizers and all of those are all just as addictive. In fact, some of them are more addictive than the alcohol. When you get addicted to sleeping pills, it's several times more difficult to come off that. And a sleeping pill is just like alcohol. It's just that it's in a tablet form. And that little innocent looking tablet, I wouldn't want to call the names now, can knock you out just like if you drink a half of a punch of rum. You understand? Especially if you don't have the tolerance for it. So that I, in my practice here, have been seeing patients by the hundreds over the years who have eventually ended up by me trying to get off these prescription pills that they were put on. And I'm not blaming the medical professionals here, because fact of the matter is that we Trinidadians are so smart. We go to the doctor, we get the tablet, we read the label, and we don't go back to the doctor. We just keep going to the pharmacy and buying it under the counter and continue to plaster ourselves. And with time, at first 2 milligrams would have put us to sleep. Then we developed tolerance, and after a little while, 5 milligrams, then 10 milligrams. And I have seen patients here who have been using tablets like if it is food, because they have developed so much tolerance. And it is very, very difficult. And the problem is, if you went, the medicine as it were, is very difficult to get these people off these drugs. In fact, a lot of doctors will tell you, well, boy, you have to use this for the rest of your life because you have become dependent on it. Well, I know that a person who has become dependent on prescription pills, there are some cases where you may have to, like those patients at St. Anne's who are chronic ill now, but even I worked at St. Anne's Hospital, which is a mental hospital for those people who don't know St. Anne's Hospital in Trinidad. And I've seen some of the old doctors sometimes discontinue the medication altogether. And few people have gotten better. There's a strange thing happened in Grenada when they had, I don't know if you would remember, maybe you're a little too young to remember Morris Bishop in Grenada when they had a little revolution like the New Jewel movement. And there was a little bit of a bombing that went on, and the mental hospital got burned down. And all the patients had to go back to their communities, to their families in the community, because there's no where to house them at the time. And when they got their brand new spanking new mental hospital, it was underpopulated because most of the people got better going back in their community. They didn't want to come back to the mental hospital. So that's a lesson in itself. So I'm saying that prescription pills can cause dependence, and that medical professionals, if I may suggest, responsible medical professionals usually work out an exit strategy for patients who have been put on uh, medicines that has the potential to create dependence, whether it be psychological dependence, physical dependence, chemical dependence, any sort of dependence, you know. So that is also a misconception that, prescription pills, pills you could buy over the counter. There are people who are now becoming addicted to painkillers, the simple little paracetamols and all of that, becoming dependent on those, Jason. And there's also the misconception that, senior citizens can't become addicted. You're at that age, or you have been on so many medicine and all of that you can't. But that is not true. You can become addicted at any stage of your life. Alcohol and drugs is no respecter of persons, notwithstanding your ethnicity, your age, your sex, your status, nothing. You interfere with it, it will eventually, you'll develop tolerance. Now, this is another widely held misconception. And while there's some truth in it, sometimes there are half-truths, like we know in half-truths and innuendos. Well, yes, no, most alcoholics and drug addicts will not stop drinking or using alcohol unless to continue to do so becomes more painful than stopping. Because when you stop, you go into withdrawal, which is very painful. So that I'm saying this for the relatives and the siblings and all of them who are well-intentioned and they would like to help the alcoholic brother or sister, and they keep covering up for them. They keep enabling them by, bailing them out of troubles and not allowing them to suffer the consequences of their behavior. And once an alcoholic or drug addict is sheltered from the consequences of their behavior, they're never going to want to stop. As I said earlier on, the only time they would want to stop is if to continue to use becomes more painful, meaning you have to allow them. It's called tough love. You have to allow them to suffer the consequences, right, of their behavior. That's the only time. Now, it is also widely held that an alcoholic or drug addict must hit bottom, meaning a lot of people think hitting bottom is that you have to be on the pavement now, you have to be on the streets, you have to be homeless. No, I'm seeing a lot of young people now. Hitting bottom is really a function of developing insight. That is, if a person is able to be counseled and they are helped to make the connection between their drinking and drug use and the consequences, they may not have to wait till they reach homelessness or hit bottom, as we say. The bottom could be raised to hit them actually, literally in a kind of way. So that this is what counseling does. In fact, after this session, I will be seeing a young man for the same reason, to help him to develop insight. That is, to think consequentially, to see how the drinking is causing the problem, not the friends, not the other situations, not the disinheritance and not all of those things. It is the person has to learn to think consequentially, to see the relationship between their drinking or drug use and the problems that they are facing in their life. So that not everyone has to wait till they hit rock bottom, as used to be believed in the old days. Now, and that is what this program is about, is helping people not to have to wait until you hit rock bottom. Because a lot of people, when they hit rock bottom, at this point now, they're saying, well, what's the point in stopping? I've lost my children, my wife, my job, my money, my health, and they're using the alcohol and drugs to help them to cope with all of that stress. They can't think of being able to deal with it on a sober head. They feel they have to be plastered 24/7. No, that's not so necessary. So, but it is always good if you could prevent you from reaching to that stage. And I know I haven't seen a program like that, but I know that there used to be programs on television called Confrontation, where it was like a drama. You kind of, or you call it, you confront the alcoholic or the drug addict, get the family together, it's a planned activity, and you probably have a facilitator, a professional, and you kind of take them by surprise, and and yes, in a few instances it might have worked, but I think it works best on in the TV, not in real life. You know, what I would rather, in fact, looking at that program, I develop another English word. I call it carefrontation. Yes, you confront the person, but you come from a position of caring for them. You let them know, look, I love you, I care about you, but when you're drinking and you're using the drugs, this is how it is affecting us, you know? And it is one of the reasons Alcoholics Anonymous has been much more successful than even us professionals. Because when an alcoholic goes to, as it is described as do a 12-step job, that is to help another alcoholic who is drinking, they don't talk to the person. They don't say, boy, you're drinking too much, you should stop, look at causing problems for your family and all of that. No, that's not how they do it. They usually pray about it. They choose their opportunity. They empathize with the person and they speak about themselves. They don't speak to the person in front of their family, their wife and children to embarrass them into, doing something about their drinking. They take them aside and they speak about themselves. It might sound like this, the person might say, look, boy, I used to drink, and this is how I started. And this is how it progressed in my life. And these are some of the things that used to happen with me. And, I went to AA. And at first, I was very reluctant. And to be honest, and while they're speaking about that, the person is not feeling threatened because you're not telling them anything. They are listening to you and they are identifying with you. This is what happens in an AA meeting. People go, they listen, and they identify with the people who are speaking about their experience and how since they've stopped, what are some of the challenges they've had in staying stopped and how they are doing it and how they are following what is called a 12-step program to help them to stay stopped. And this is why AA has been so successful, so that confrontation, shaming the person, sending them on guilt trips and all of that is not as effective. However, I would also say, though, that it is important to let the person suffer the consequences of their behavior. That in itself, alcoholics and drug addicts are not people who would generally listen and learn or read something and learn from it. They usually have to experience it themselves. They have to actually, like we say, bounce their head, and then they come to realize, well, look, and they have to bounce it real hard sometimes, and a lot of people feel that you could just stay. Even I know people in recovery who think that you could just do this thing cold turkey. That could be a dangerous thing, especially for alcoholics who are over the age of 40, and who have had a history of hallucinations and delirium tremens and all of those things. It might be dangerous to try to sober them up on their own. In the old days, yes, they'll give them a lot of coffee, they'll sit with them and, allow them to sweat it out, spend a day or 2 days with them. This is how it was done in the old days of AA, I understand, where you'd cold turkey it. But now, with modern science, some amount of medication can be used. And now, of course, a lot of treatment facilities are using, indeed in Trinidad as well, are using acupuncture to help to deal with these withdrawal symptoms. And the advantage, I think I spoke on a previous program about the use of acupuncture in treating drug addiction. The advantage with acupuncture is that you can't get addicted to it. You don't become dependent. That's one of the risks with using chemotherapy in detox. I have found, having worked at St. Anne's and at Cora Hospital at the substance abuse treatment facilities and so on, there's a tendency in medicine to use psychotropic drugs to help the person to deal with the withdrawal symptoms, only to find sometimes that they now become addicted to the prescription drugs. Now, this is an interesting little story. You know, Dr. Smith at the Lincoln Hospital in South Bronx, New York, introduced the use of acupuncture there. What had happened in the Bronx is there was an epidemic, as I would say, of heroin abuse. You know, it was so predominant and prevalent, and the authorities there were at their wits' end now what to do, how to get these people off, because these are very, very powerful drugs. And then they came up with another drug called methadone. Just like in Trinidad, when you go in for alcoholism withdrawal, you'll be put on, you know, sedatives, because alcohol is a sedative, and you'll be weaned off and helped to come off the alcohol. So too, methadone was used to get the people off heroin, only to find out they had a bigger problem developing that had developed. That is to say, people were now becoming addicted to methadone and was finding all kinds of ways to get it and sell it. A whole trade had started. And that's when Dr. Michael Smith introduced the use of acupuncture in treating the drug addiction there. Because you can't get addicted to acupuncture. It doesn't give you a high, but if you are depressed, it brings you up. If you're anxious, it calms you down. It actually brings the body into balance. So that's a safe way that we have available to us. I know that the New Life Ministries, they are using acupuncture in their treatment program there. Indeed, I had the privilege to train some of the practitioners there myself. So that is an option, that's a very valuable option that is now being used in North America and Europe, South America as well. Now, a lot of people seem to think that, you know, to go to detox is really for rich people and so on. Only rich people could afford detox. Well, I want to let our public know in Trinidad that we do have detox facilities in Trinidad. There's the Ward 1 at the San Fernando General Hospital, which is a psychiatric unit. But if you went in there with alcoholism, withdrawal, that is, you're hallucinating and all of that, you will be admitted. And so too is the Ward 8 of the Port of Spain General Hospital. There's also the St. Anne's Hospital that is especially designed for detoxing people from all sorts of drug addiction. And usually my experience is, having worked in that, both St. Anne's and Cora Hospital, what would happen is you will be detoxed at St. Anne's Hospital, and then usually if there's a space at Cora Hospital for admission, you will be referred to Cora Hospital directly from St. Anne's. Sometimes you are put on a waiting list, I know, and you are enrolled in the outpatient program. So that detox is not only for the wealthy, although I know that the wealthy, because of the stigma, a lot of people who in the upper and middle class brackets will send their loved ones away because of the stigma associated with this. Even in the local facilities, nobody wants anyone to know that their relative went to St. Anne's Hospital, because the first impression is that maybe they're mentally ill. Then there's a real question of, as we discussed in the last program, a lot of people think, well, boy, if I let my employers know that I have a problem with alcohol or drugs, I would lose my job. Well, there's some truth to that. But there's a lot of companies now, there's a lot of government departments with employee assistance programs. And what they do, if you identify that confidentially to your HR department, that look, you recognize that you have a drug problem and you'd like to do something about it, the accommodation is made for that. So that, in fact, most companies will not want to lose a worker who is very skilled, who is very competent and all of that because of alcoholism. And usually my experience is that they will make allowances so that the person can go for treatment, go for detox, and become sober. Now, I know we're running out of time, so I'll quickly touch on one or two others that a lot of people believe if you relapse, and even the family members sometimes resign themselves, well, oh God, I took him to Cora, I took him to private for counseling and all of that. He went to AA and look, he's gone back on drinking. And sometimes the alcoholic himself feel he gives up and says, look, I know I can't make it. I will just have to drink until I die. Well, no. Actually, relapse can become a very useful and valuable part of recovery. Because from a relapse, a person can learn what is it they did wrong, what they could have avoided, what they could have done differently, as it were. They could do a post-mortem of the relapse experience and learn from it so that they can prevent it from happening in the future. And I have known so many people in my experience who, yes, they relapsed quite a few times, but they never gave up. It's just like in life, sometimes you fall down, but if you stay down, well, then you've lost. But you never fail until you stop trying. Once you keep trying, you have not failed. And I always remember Thomas Edison, who failed so many times, but never gave up making the light bulb. And eventually he succeeded. And finally, let me say that a lot of people think, wives and mothers and brothers and sisters think if he only stopped drinking, everything will get better. Wives especially think, the only problem is the drinking or the drug use. And once they stop, something is wrong with them. They need to change. We don't need to change. Well, alcoholism and drug addiction, unlike other illnesses, Jason, is a family illness. In fact, it affects everyone the alcoholic or drug addict comes in contact with. So that sometimes the families as well, they have to look at how they may have contributed to the person's drinking and drug use. Because in some families, remember, everybody else is drinking, and some of them are drinking and not getting themselves into trouble, and they think it is okay to continue to drink. The one who is drinking and getting into trouble, because alcohol affects different people in different ways. He needs to stop, but it is very difficult to stop when everybody around you drinking. And then there are certain families, maladaptive behaviors in families where they can generate so much of stress for the person that they have no choice, but not that they don't have no choice, but they choose to drink to help themselves cope. So I know that there are a lot of people, in fact, this is an interactive program, and you would have seen my number on the screen, whether you're listening in Trinidad or from abroad. It is 868-671-3040. If you have any questions relating to anything that was said in the program this morning, any clarification, I would be only too happy if you want to call and we can have clarification, we can have a discussion about it. And I want to let you know that help is available. It doesn't matter at what stage you have reached. In fact, the worse you think you are, the more you are ready to do something about it. So I want to thank you, Jason. I want to thank Jagriti TV and Radio for again hosting me this morning so that we can reach out to all our brothers and sisters worldwide and to let our listeners know this program is aired again at 10 o'clock tonight on the same media house. You can listen to it then. It will be posted on YouTube in a short while. So you can go back at your own leisure and listen to the program. And of course, you can call on if you have any questions.
Well, always thank you for taking the time to do this program. We definitely left not only me, but all listeners, our viewers, a lot to think about in terms of all the misconceptions there is about alcoholism and drug abuse. So join us next Thursday for another edition of the program Addiction Recovery. Same time, same station. Until then, see you around.